In ancient times in Greece, there was a place called Delphi, and you could go see this oracle, the Oracle of Delphi, and you would go to see the Oracle of Delphi if you wanted to hear from the god, to see what it would say or what it would speak to you. And that reminds me of, the Catechism begins, the first section is not about God, it's about man's search for God. That there's a desire in every human heart to encounter God, to encounter the divine, to encounter what is holy. And our hearts are looking for that. This is the famous Prophets U2, the band once said, but I still haven't found what I'm looking for, right? That my heart is constantly searching, it's looking for where is God? Where can I encounter God? Where can I encounter God as a living person? And that's the desire of all of our hearts. And as a priest, people often encounter, when they encounter me, especially if they're not very religious or they don't know the good news of what Jesus has done for us and how close God is drawn to us, there's a sense of you must be closer than I am, so how do you get closer to God, And again, it's revealing this desire that we have. And to that desire, the Lord gives us this gospel that we just heard in the Gospel of Mark. And Mark does this a lot of times. We'll have a story that starts, and then in the middle he'll have another. It's called the Markan Sandwich. It's not a great title. And then in the center he has another story, and then he comes back to the first story again at the end. And so we have these two people, Jairus, a synagogue official, and he has a daughter who's at the point of death, who's 12 years old. And then in the middle of that story, we have this woman with the hemorrhages who's been suffering for 12 years. What they both have in common is that they're very desperate. They're very desperate. They need someone to help them. They need healing, and they go to Jesus for that. And this woman, the one with the hemorrhages, she says to herself, if I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured. And it says that she does that, and the flow of blood immediately stops. And then it says that Jesus, I love this, it says that he's aware that power has gone out from him. And then he says, who has touched my clothes? Now, we know from earlier in the scripture that it says people are pressing upon him. Like the image in our brain would be something like when you see people at a famous court cases, they come out of the court case and they're being sheltered and their lawyers are pushing you back and everyone's upon them, That's kind of this sense that everyone is upon Jesus, And the disciples are pushing them away from him so that he's not crushed by the crowd. And in the midst of that scene, Jesus says, power has gone out from me. Who has touched my clothes? And they say, you see how the crowd is pressing upon you, and yet you ask, who touched me? In other words, they're trying to say to Jesus, Jesus, everyone has touched you. It's a mob. They're upon you. It'd be better to say who hasn't touched you. Jesus, everyone is trying to touch you or get near you, But the interesting thing is, although all of these people touch Jesus as he's walking to Jairus' house, we only know of one person who is healed, which is this woman with the hemorrhages. Lots of people touched Jesus that day, but only one person was healed on the way there. Why? What was different about the touch of this woman? What was different about her desire? And the answer is that she approached Jesus with living faith, with supernatural trust that God could heal her, that Jesus could heal her. And that made all of the difference. What if we could touch the Lord today? What if we could have an encounter like this woman had nearly 2,000 years ago? And friends, we can. It says in the Catechism that says, often Jesus asked the sick to believe. It says, the sick tried to touch him, quote, for power came forth from him and healed them all. And so in the sacraments, Christ continues to touch us in order to heal us. In other words, that what was present in Jesus' life, Jesus would heal people, he would forgive people, he would restore people, he would cast out demons. The very same things that Jesus did when he walked the earth, the church now does by his power and in his name. So where is God today? Well, he's in his church, but in a special way, he's in the sacraments. And through the sacraments, Jesus now touches us today. We can have an encounter with the holy, with the living God, with the divine one through the sacraments. And we have this encounter in its most perfect form, its most beautiful way, through the Eucharist. But remember, in this story, lots of people touched Jesus. But only one person was healed on the way, which is this woman with the hemorrhages. And why? Because she had living faith. She desired to have this encounter with the Lord. And when I was a seminarian, I met this priest who was on fire for the Lord. And I remember once he was preaching about the Eucharist. And one of the things he said, he said, if we believe in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, but we don't think he has the power to transform our lives, then he said, what we're saying to Jesus is, I still believe in your presence, but I no longer believe in your power. I don't think you can actually change my life. Either you don't care that much to change my life, or you don't have the power to do it. That's what we're saying to the Lord. But this woman believed, and that belief made all the difference. And it goes on to say, and he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. In other words, it looks like she's doing something to him. She's in this crowd, she touches him, she gets healed. But actually something ends up happening to her, the supernatural encounter. And I remember meeting this woman years ago at the seminary I went to, and she was taking classes there, and I think for a profession she was a dentist, but she was getting more and more into her faith. And at one point in her walk with the Lord, she said in prayer, the Lord said to her, "You're going to start going to daily mass." And she had never done that. And the Lord said to her, "This is not something you're going to do for me. This is something I'm going to do for you." Because we think like, oh, I'm going to mass. This is something I'm doing for God. When really it's something the Lord's doing for us. Friends, even when we come to mass, do we think of it primarily as just an obligation we fulfill, you know? Like when you're a kid, you gotta take vitamins or get your shots, or like when you get a little older, you gotta go to the DMV and get tags for your car, or, just things you gotta do. You gotta have these obligations. You gotta pay taxes, whatever. Do we think of coming to mass primarily as that? Or do we think of primarily as an encounter with the living God? That I come to encounter the God who can change, transform, or heal me. That's who Jesus is. And so if we want to have this kind of encounter, we need to have this kind of faith. What makes Jesus' clothes powerful? What makes his clothes powerful is that they're his. That's why. What makes the sacraments powerful? It's because they're Jesus's. They're, as the church says, sacraments are powers flowing out of the body of Christ into our lives. And friends, what if we approach the Eucharist with this kind of living faith? What difference would that make in our lives? What if we came to the Eucharist with a heart like this woman who had these hemorrhages, and something very simple that she does, and I hope all of us do this when we come to Mass, is she had an intention when she approached the Lord. She wanted something. She had a desire of her heart, which is, I want to be healed. And Jesus, I've tried, I've exhausted myself going to all of these doctors, and none of them have helped. And sometimes when we have like a sin in our life, we try all these different ways to be healed of it, but we're not going directly to Jesus. Think, Jesus, you heal me. You help me get over this sin. Or I have a situation there's not peace there, and I get all these people's advice, and I read these books, but I'm not going directly to Jesus, saying, Jesus, you change this situation. Or I see a cowardice in my life. It's something I want to change, and I'm not going directly to the Lord and say, Lord, please, you give me a boldness. You give me a love for your word. You change me, Jesus. This woman has this desire, and she brings it directly to the Lord. If somebody could listen to you or listen to me as we approach the Eucharist, we come forward to receive Holy Communion, what would they hear our hearts saying? Are you and I, are we pouring our hearts out to God, asking him to change us, to transform us, to convict us? That doesn't mean that every time we ask the Lord, let's say for a healing, a physical healing, he's going to miraculously heal us every time we receive the Eucharist. We do know from the second story that starts and ends that what Jesus says to the little woman, the little girl, I say to you, little girl, arise, talitha cum. He's going to say to all of us who are in union with him at the end of time. He's going to raise us from the dead. I say to you, little young man, I say to you, young woman, arise, and we're going to rise from the dead. Jesus has promised us that. And through his resurrection, he's proven that he can do that. So we know he has ultimate victory over death at the end of time. But in the midst, are we bringing the Lord our hearts? Friends, the world needs Jesus. And if we want to be transformed by his love, we have to come with living faith. Living faith. And I don't know about you, but I think sometimes we don't ask the Lord for things because deep down we're like a little afraid he's not going to do it, or we can't be let down. Sometimes when people have parents who let them down a lot, like they make promises, like, oh, I'll be there, and then they don't show up, then kids develop like a callous on their heart, and they don't expect anything from their parents. When their parent make a promise, they just like, well, we'll see. Sometimes we can be like that with God, because it's easy when we don't really ask the Lord for things or share our hearts with him, because then he can't really let us down, right? Because we weren't like putting our hearts into it, But I'm telling you, I read a book years ago called Hungry for God, and in it, the author, his name's Ralph Martin. He said if he had to use one word that described biblical faith, the kind of faith that this woman shows, that one word would be gutsy. Gutsy. The people who are healed in the gospel, just think about them. They had guts. They were willing to put themselves on the line. They were willing to go into a mob and reach out to try to touch Jesus. Do we have that kind of faith when we approach the Eucharist, knowing that through the Eucharist, he touches us? Lord, transform me, change me, convict me, heal me. In the Eucharist, Jesus comes among us in poverty. He looks very poor to us. He comes to us in what appears to be simple bread and wine. But the reason why he does that is so that we can receive him, so that he can touch us, so we can have an encounter with him. And through that reception, we receive his riches. He's trying to give us his riches of his love, of his mercy, of his glory, of his restoration. And when we come to that with living faith, we experience even his power.